Hello, everybody. Hope you're having a lovely day, as they say, and welcome to the Top Deck Thoughts. My name is Jordan Leroy Hansen, but I'm also known as LevDev. Also, before we get started, I did want to talk about a membership opportunity for Ko-Fi. You can actually help support my card reviewing shenanigans on Ko-Fi with some memberships. That gets you access to some behind-the-scenes stuff for videos, as well as just essentially some opportunities to play with me with games, also be able to do some deck doctoring on your decks for EDH and other formats. So, nevertheless, before that, though, we got some cards to talk about. And we are going back to the magical plane of Lorwyn for Lorwyn Eclipsed. Now, personally, I'm actually pretty excited for this set. While it's probably not as silly as previous sets in Standards past, there is actually a lot of charm in this set. Just a lot of whimsy, a lot of just silly shenanigans, especially boggarts. I like my boggart shenanigans, as many can say. But there's also just a lot of stuff for everyone. Giants, elves, fairies, oh my. But there is also a lot of cool cards in this set. And I'll be honest, it's going to be interesting to see the top 10 cards or top 15, 20, etc. for a lot of creators, because there's enough cool cards in this set that actually can offer pretty much a lot of variety for a lot of different players. So, for this, we are actually going to talk my personal top 10 cards of Lorwyn Eclipsed. Now, before we get started, though, we gotta have the honorary mentions, and this time around, we're going to have the honorary mentions be, honestly, the completion of the Shockland cycle. Shocklands are multi-format staples. They are just essentially very good for EDH, as well as just essentially any format that can fetch them with a fetch land. But they're also going to be great in Standard as well, because they are really great with the Verge land cycle, and many Standard players are going to appreciate the fact that they, for their multicolored deck designs, that they have access to these lands. We'll also put one more card on the honorary mention. And this one, it's going to be a take here, but let's put Moonshadow on the honorary mentions. Now, a lot of people have already seen kind of like my take on Blue Sky about this card, but, well, I'll let General Akbar essentially say my overall opinion on the card.
It's a trap!
Hear me out on this. So, I do have to admit the card is cool. It's a really cool design, having a 1-mana 7/7 that essentially can become that 7/7, but you have to find a way to get the 6 counters off it that make it into a 1/1 menace. There are a lot of cool ways to brew around this card, especially in Standard. Like, there are ways to actually interact with this card to get the counters off really quickly, even from this main set, as well as from other cards within Standard. There's also a lot of ways you can just fuel the engine through constant discard or essentially surveil. But I do feel like it's just a lot, and I mean a lot of setup to actually just get, hopefully, a silly, really big 7/7, essentially. I don't know. It's just one of those cards where, if there is one thing going for this card, is I do think in older formats, it's going to be a lot more easier to actually get this to be a pretty big threat. Mostly because you will have access to Shocklands, or not Shocklands, access to fetch lands, as well as just essentially access to stuff like bubbles and such, like Mishra's Bubbles, stuff like that. That should be able to make the Moonshadow get into a big threat pretty quick. But I don't know. It's hard because I still feel like I have to put it in the list here somewhere, because I do think for a lot of people they are hyping this card. But I do feel like this card is a trap. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong, and maybe this card is a Pro Tour staple card. We'll see. And then the one last thing I will say as an honorary mention is, honestly, you can tell a lot of love was put in this set, especially for, of all things, the trailer for this set. Because they actually decided to collaborate with Jim Henson Company. Yes, the Muppet people. Or the Dark Crystal people, if you want to go with that. And the trailer for this set is actually ridiculously one of the most charming trailers that they did in a while. So, if you haven't yet, well, granted, seeing how many views it has, I think you've already seen it if you're watching a top 10 of this. But if for some random reason you have not watched the trailer yet, go watch the trailer. It is actually a lot more charming. It's very well crafted. And it is, like, it put a smile on my face without much of a sweat. So, nevertheless, those are our honorary mentions. Let's actually get to the top 10 now for Lorwyn Eclipsed. Shall we?
Number 10.
My number 10 card for Lorwyn Eclipsed is definitely going to be a Hear Me Out card, because this card is definitely a card that even I initially was kind of looking at and was not really that hyped for. But it's a card that actually kind of grew on me the more I think about it. So we do get 2 Planeswalkers in the set, and while technically the most probably constructed viable card is probably the Ajani, I'm actually going to make an argument and actually say that Oko, Lorwyn Liege, as well as the flip side, Shadowmoor Scion, is my 10th card for the set. Hear me out. So, for people who don't know, this Oko essentially has a double side, and it does play with one of the mechanics in the set where you can constantly pay 1 mana to flip it onto the other side. The gimmick they did this time around is the front side has 2 modes, essentially making it where 1 target creature gains all creature types, as well as making a creature smaller for a turn. And then the back side is the one mode that people are probably hyping up the most, mostly because it has the regrowth mill ability, as well as making elk tokens, as well as the ultimate if you get to it. So, why am I actually giving the number 10 spot to Oko? Well, a few reasons, honestly. 1, this is actually a card that kind of has the legacy of being able to now be playing a turn-free Oko, which I think a lot of people have still remembered the past of turn-free Oko FIFA Crowns, and that was a format warper, to say at the very least. Now, to be fair, they made this a lot more balanced, so it's not going to be Oko Broko, hopefully. However, we are in a format where Llanowar Elves is a card, so you can actually get this out as early as turn 2, and I gotta give it credit for that. And surprisingly, the +2, I was kind of a little bit on the +2 initially, just giving a creature all creature types, essentially making it into a changeling, more or less. There's a reason why changelings are in the art on the front side, to be blunt. But there is actually some synergy by making, like, your Llanowar Elf into every creature type. For example, in the set itself, we have the Behold cards, as well as the Behold cards from Dragonstorm and such, where it's like you behold a dragon, or behold elf, goblin, stuff like that. So you can actually set up and essentially enable those cards as early as theoretically turn 2 with the turn 2 Oko with Llanowar Elves, and then make your elves into a dragon. Which for all the Dragon Breath cycles in Dragonstorm, that's excluding the blue one, which, let's be frank, the blue one is the more popular one, being a mana leak, essentially. That is actually very good to have those enabled as early as turn 2 to 3. That is absurd. And of course, the +1 does protect itself. But also, just this Planeswalker is just good because it just has 5 activated abilities that you can have access to. Granted, you don't have access to all of them right off the front. You do have to spend the mana, but you can just, for example, just +1 or +2, depending on the mode you need at the moment, a few times, and then just when you want to, flip Oko and actually get all the really good negative abilities on the back. Like, if you can get to the ultimate in a Kindred-based deck, that's actually very good. But even just making the Elks is actually not that bad, because then you can flip back, and then +2 Oko, and then make those Elks into every creature type, which then benefits with, like I said before, the Behold cards, as well as potentially any creature-based Kindred Lords that you have in your deck design. Also, this does help enable Mott's Jasper, which is kind of nice, I'm not going to lie. So, yeah, and I guess if there's one other thing that makes me like this Oko and put on the 10th spot, I guess the abs. But yeah, I think this card, is it as broken as the previous free mana Oko FIFA Crowns? Absolutely not. But I do think this card is actually a lot better than I originally gave it credit for. So my number 10 spot, Oko, Lorwyn Liege, as well as Shadowmoor Scion.
Number 9.
My number 9th card for Lorwyn Eclipsed has got to be a pretty cool free drop that we actually got in the set, which is Twilight Diviner. Now, simply put, this is actually a really cool Reanimator Panharmonicon design, which is a pretty powerful card, honestly, especially since most Reanimator strategies have essentially reanimating creatures with powerful ETB triggers. Being able to double those triggers by essentially making a token copy is actually very good. You can even though they try to restrict the tokens you can make, essentially making only 1 token of if you, like, did a mass multi-reanimation spells, There is still ways you can actually double the tokens, like let's say with the Elspeth from Dragonstorm, or any other anointed procession type effect. And also, what's nice about this card is, while it is also just reanimated Panharmonicon, it also kind of helps with the reanimated strategy, because the Surveil component as its ETB really helps with that strategy a lot, being able to look at your top 2 cards, and then throw any of your reanimator targets and such into the graveyard. That's very nice. Also, since this is non-legendary, multiple copies of this do stack the trigger, so if you have like 2 Twilight Diviners on the battlefield, and then you reanimate something, then you are going to get 2 token copies, or even 4 token copies if we have that Elspeth, as we mentioned earlier. So yeah, my number 9 spot is Twilight Diviner. Not really much to say here. It's just Reanimator Panharmonicon, and that is a very strong effect, to be quite frankly honest. Number 8 card on this list, and this one is actually kind of interesting as it's more of a removal spell, and that has to be the In-Blaze Epiphany. Now, simply put, this is actually just nice scalable removal to essentially be able to put Ets into any removal to remove any early game as well as late game creatures if you have enough Ets for it. But the nifty little thing that people are going to miss about this card, mostly we do like the Anticipate card draw effect on this, being able to look at the top Ets cards equal to a creature's power, and then just Ets out 1 card and then have access to it to the end of your next turn. That's really nice. But what's a secret little mode of this card that people are going to miss, while it is good removal, Ets can actually be 0 for this card and be a 1 mana Anticipate. Which for some people that's going to be a little bit tilting your head sideways, like why would you want to do that? You would probably just want to use removal, right? Well, there is some circumstances where if you're ahead and you have a significantly good board state, and then your opponent decides to board wipe, as long as it's not the Ultima variety, you can then In-Blaze Epiphany one of your own creatures to then essentially get access to the Anticipate card draw. So the fact that you have access to the fact that this can just be essentially a 1 mana cycle spell that can dig as deep as your biggest power creature is actually very strong. Don't sleep on that mode on this card. And also, Scalable Burn, while you can't target your opponent with this, we do have enough Stuffy Doll-like effects in Standard, aka Pain for All from Edge of Eternities, that you can technically use this as a victory condition as long as you have one of those type of creatures on your board. So yeah, with that, that's the reason why In-Blaze Epiphany is my number 8 card for Lorwyn Eclipsed.
7.
My 7th card for the list, and this one's going to be interesting because there is going to be a bunch of cards here, but if there is one thing that this set has going for it, if I'm being legit honest, is that this set has a lot of good tech cards. For those who don't know, what a tech card is, essentially it's a card that essentially helps you control the board state or just helps you essentially tech against matchups and such. And this set has a lot of good tech cards. Like, for example, Roast, great. Burns removal spell at instant speed. Spell Snare, probably going to be the best 1 mana counter spell in Standard for a while. There's even Chomping Changeling, which is essentially a reclamation save, so now any essentially creature archetype can have access to and still have the benefits of their kindred shenanigans if they have lore effects, etc., 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 as we mentioned previously with Foco. But if we have to put at least a set of tech cards that are really good in this set, if we have to put one specifically on the 7th spot, it has to be the whole Elemental Incarnation cycle. Because if we're being legit honest with ourselves, these are just tech cards that are on a body, which is very strong, honestly. And then also just there's a lot of effects about getting both effects early. Now, yes, there is a con that technically speaking you can't do the scam shenanigans like you did with the previous Invoke Elementals, where you invoke it and then you like do a flicker spell or stuff and essentially be able to repeat an ETB. You do have to spend mana to actually get the ETB triggers. However, there is actually a really good significant benefit to actually evoking these early. And that's mostly because you can either reanimate them and still get like a nice solid body, but most importantly, due to the fact that with Murders at Karloff Manor, we still have access to the Collect Evidence mechanic. You can actually just evoke these earlies, and then just since all these are significantly high mana cost, you can actually help fuel the Collect Evidence mechanic. And we have a couple of popular Collect Evidence mechanics still in Standard. Analyze the Pollen is probably one I can think of right off the bat, but there's also like the Board Wipe that like there's a lot of good collect evidence cards that being able to exile these elementals when they're in the graveyard to get extra value from them once you evoke them is actually very nice. But even then, also just later in the game, you can just cast it for the full mana cost, and for the most part, if you brood around it right, get both ETB triggers, which is very strong. Also, since we'll just link this back from the previous standard set that we reviewed, with Avatar, you can actually airbend these elementals, which is pretty amusing, and actually just then cast them for the airbend costs and still get the evoke ETB, which is actually pretty cool. So, nevertheless, I do think all these elementals will see play one way or another because they're just, at their worst, they're just really solid tech cards that have a body on them. And the body themselves, whether in the graveyard or on the battlefield, has a lot of ways to actually be used. Like heck, even I was talking with Sunday Cat last night, and he mentioned how even after you get the ETB with them, if you kept the body on the battlefield, you can use a card that is we're going to be talking about in the list, aka Abigail, to actually then give all these flying lifelink insights, and that's kind of cute. We'll talk about Abigail in a quick minute, but nevertheless, number 7th on this list, it has to be tech cards for the set, but if we have to go with a specific set of tech cards, it has to be the Elemental Incarnation Cycle, without a sweat.
Number 6.
So, my number 6 card for the set, and this one is actually kind of a cute giant, I'm not gonna lie, and that is Bray of Clan Startarm. Now, this one is actually a pretty powerful card. Being able to give your another creature you control flying and lifelink is pretty strong, but that's not why we're talking about this card. Primarily, we're talking about this card because it's Instep Trigger, which is if as long as you gain life this turn, basically it says you draw a card, or you essentially be able to cast a spell for free if the spell's mana value is less than or equal to the amount of life you gain that turn. And that ability is very strong, you all. Like, one of the stronger abilities I have seen for a 4-drop in a minute. Because you gotta provide this with a little bit of context. Keep in mind, in Standard, we're in a format where Lightning Helix as well as Boral's Charm are both cards. And those are just essentially burn spells that deal 3 to 4 damage and allows you to gain 3 to 4 life. So, with that in mind, with the Boral, you essentially are able to gain the life and then be able to, theoretically, be able to cast another one for free in theory if you're able to exile with Blade of Clan Standoff, or even play any of your early game aggro drops for free, potentially, with Bray, which is kind of absurd. And even at worse, you just, essentially, it's just gain life, draw a card, which is very, very strong. Also, you got to keep in mind that Soul Sisters is an archetype in Standard. We do have our Johnny Pridemates in the bat equivalent that I'm brain farting on the name for Bloomborough. And it actually is synergistic with Bray because once you get a ridiculously big Johnny Pridemate, you can just activate Bray's ability and just give that Pridemate flying and lifelink and just be like, poof. It's like kind of like how you see some of Johnny Pridemates and Soul Sister archetypes get like the Sheltered by Ghosts, and then giving it lifelink is absurd because it then triggers getting the plus. But then now it gets more absurd with Bray because if you get the lifelink, then you have access to the free card draw or free spell. Just this card is secretly a lot more powerful than it looks at first glance. Like, it's obviously a homage to the original Stout Arm from Lorwyn, but seriously, this card is actually pretty nuts. So yeah, number 6 on this list, it has to be Bray. Bray is a pretty absurd Magic card, honestly, without a doubt.
Number 5.
So, what is my number 5 card for Lorwyn Eclipsed? And this one has to be an interesting gimmick this time around, because not only we get all the fantasy shenanigans that we expect from Lorwyn Eclipsed, but we're actually getting a little bit of foreshadowing, essentially, of the upcoming Strixhaven set. Okay, long story short, for those who haven't read the lore, essentially we have a cycle of Lorwyn students in the set that essentially traveled to Lorwyn by accident, technically by the manipulations of Oko. Go read the story, it's actually a pretty fun story. So, nevertheless, we have actually a cycle of dual-colored, essentially, students that are in the respective colors of the Strixhaven colleges. And the one we're going to be talking about here, while all of them are very strong, we're going to talk about the one that actually I kind of am anticipating playing with, and that has to be Abigail Eloquent First Gear. Honestly, this card is just very funny. So it's a 2-mana 1/1 flying and lifelink. link in First Strike, so it's a Healers Hawk. But then it has the ability to make another creature lose all of its abilities and make it into a Healers Hawk, essentially. Now, some of you might be wondering, why the heck would I like this card a lot? And that's because it makes one of my pet jank standard cards, Lupine Prototype, be able to fly, baby! Fly, my creation! You are finally being able to attack and get 5 life. But no, seriously. It is actually really good to target your own creatures with significant downsides with Abigail's ability, making it lose the negative trait, and then being able to get all the Healer Hawk like keyword abilities, which is actually very strong. Like there's, for example, from Dragonstorm, there's the 2-mana demon that had Decay, that's a 5/5. So you're able to actually use Abigail to target that demon and then lose the Decay ability and just have a 2-mana 5/5 demon with flying, first strike, and lifelink. That is not bad. I'm not going to lie. That's actually very good. There is actually kind of a brew you can brew around Abigail, honestly, that seems to be pretty fun. However, it should be noted that in a pinch, you can negate an opponent's creature, even though you are making it into a quote-unquote Healer's Hawk. Mostly, we're talking about the cards with really powerful triggered abilities. Like, let's say, for example, Unstoppable Slasher, maybe in one that has, like, maybe a really strong in-step trigger. Like, for example, even Bray, what we were talking about previously. Like, if your opponent has a Bray and you really don't want the Bray trigger to happen, you could just negate it and make it into a giant with flying, first strike, and lifelink, which is still kind of scary, but better than giving them access to a lot of card draw and the free spell trigger. You can even play this in birds, honestly, surprisingly, since we have Cavern of Souls to help with the fit scene, but also allows you to make some pretty good birds into really scary threats. Like, we all know about the scariness of Saz's Chocobo when it gets really big with a bunch of landfall triggers. As long as you don't mind negating the landfall trigger, if it's already chunky enough, you can also make the Saz's Chocobo into a flying first strike lifelink. You kind of see where I'm getting here. I feel like Abigail is secretly probably one of the better cards this cycle. Is it the strongest? No. There's probably a chance that Kiro's probably the strongest this cycle because the trigger, being able to double your triggered abilities or double your abilities with the tapping creatures down is pretty strong. But if you have to ask me what's my personal favorite of the cycle, it has to be Abigail because there's a lot of fun ways to brew around it. Plus, it allows me to play with my janky Lupine Prototype card, which makes me happy.
Number 4.
So, my number 4 card of the list. Now, we have actually a pretty cool cycle in this set, which is the command cycle. Basically, what they did here for Lorwyn Eclipsed, there's a lot of favorite characters from Lorwyn Eclipsed from the previous set that made a return here. There is also one new character that got a command as well, but essentially, long story short, they all got a command, which for those who don't know, command was an original cycle in Lorwyn. We had monocolored commands. This time around, we actually have dual-colored commands. And the one that I'm going to feature on my number 4 spot has to be Ashleen's command. This card is really nutty for an instant, if I'm being legit honest with you all. Now, essentially, this is a supercharged Prismari command, if we're being honest, but all the modes are very relevant and versatile. Being able to ramp with 2 treasures, so you essentially get mana rebate from casting this spell for 5 mana. That's very good. Being able to have the semi, kind of like board wipe effect to be able to essentially make sure to maybe take out like a very small board state. That's actually very nice. Even drawing 2 cards is always very nice. But even the create a token that's a copy of a target elemental you control, that's actually really powerful if you remember the fact that elementals in general are very strong cards that either A, have very strong ETBs, or B, can synergize with cards that have strong ETB-like triggers. Like, we're talking about the Risen Reefs of the world. We're talking about the Cavalier cycle of the world. There's a lot of powerful elementals. I mean, heck, we could even talk about, like, Avenger Zendikar. Like, there's a lot of really good elementals that have really strong ETBs. That being able to get a second copy to double the ETB trigger and get another body is very good at instant speed, which is very strong. So yeah, without a doubt, my number 4 card of the list has to be Ashleen's Command. This is just a very powerful card, you all. This is very, very strong.
Number 3.
My free card for the set, and this one is kind of a no-brainer, especially for people who've been catching up with the spoiler season, but we kind of have to talk about it. My number 3 card of the set has to be the Formidable Speaker. This, honestly, is just one of the best reanimator tech cards that we have ever got. So, it's a free mana 2/4. When this enters, you can discard a card. If you do, you search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. This is just going to be so good to help to enable graveyard and creature-based combo decks, honestly. Like, case in point, like, one of the popular standard archetypes is currently the Superior Spider-Man, Gifts Ungiven, essentially Reanimator deck. So being able to discard, like, a Reanimator target with Formidable Speaker to then tutor your Superior Spider-Man or Karavik if we're playing it on Arena. So being able to do that and tutor what is going to be your Reanimator spell and such is just going to be probably a play that we just going to have to expect in Standard, honestly. Be prepared to see it a lot, is what I'm just going to say, especially in the Sultai Reanimator deck. And also, it's kind of nice because it also helps enable one of my favorite cards, which is Agapa's Soul Cauldron. Yay! Being able to discard a creature card into your graveyard to tutor for another card that either you're going to play, or maybe even find another way to discard into the graveyard to essentially throw into the soup. Love that. So yeah, I kind of love this card. And even the untap ability is actually pretty relevant in the Elves archetype, since we do have a lot of good Mana Dork Elves in Standard in general. Some coming from this set, as well as just the Archdruid that literally taps for how many Elves you control, essentially that mana. You can just untap it with this Formidable Speaker, since it's an elf, and then just generate a lot of mana. There's a lot of good things going on for Formidable Speaker. This is probably going to be one of the more popular standard cards in the set, if I'm being legit honest. There's just a lot of archetypes that want this type of card. So, my number 3 card for the list has to be Formidable Speaker. It is just a very, very strong card. Plus, it's also the Jean Emmanuel Deprez's World Championship card, so it makes sense.
Number 2.
So, what is my number 2 card for Lorwyn Eclipsed? Well, let's actually start with a 2-drop, and it is one of the first cards that got officially revealed for the set. And the more I think about it, the more I feel like this card needs to go on the list. And that has to be the Bitter Bloom Bearer, a 2-mana 1/1 flash flying fairy that has the beginning of your upkeep, you lose 1 life and create a fairy token. Now, for those who are the more well-astute, will probably know that this is actually an homage to Bitter Blossom, one of the more powerful enchantments in the original Lorwyn set, that it essentially enabled the fairy archetype. Very strong enchantment. You still see it played in even EDH today, honestly. But this card itself, being a Bitter Blossom on a body, is actually relevant for a lot of reasons. First reason, this is actually going to be pretty good for Dimir midrange, because being able to make evasive flying tokens, that's going to help you sneak in your Kaitos. That's enough said there. Like, being able to make the flying tokens to help sneak in Kaito, as well as if you make a couple of them, being able to enable your Enduring Curiosity, that's very good. That's probably going to be the one most popular thing about this card, honestly, for Standard, is that it seems to be a very solid inclusion to Dimir midrange. But it's also great for the inevitable potential fairy archetype. If we do get fairies, if fairies is another competitive Standard archetype, which it does have a chance since we still have access to Wilds of Eldraine fairies. So you can technically, in theory, make the fairy archetype a thing. So it's something to keep in mind. Flash on this helps a lot, because being able to cast this at the end of your opponent's turn to then make sure you absolutely get the token, very nice. Also, being a very early game drop, it can be reanimated easy with cards like Raise the Pass. And also just providing multiple bodies with its trigger can be good for aristocrat-based strategies, essentially be able to sack them and then just be able to get the aristocrat triggers. But just in general, it's just a good token engine generator like Bitter Blossom before. And with that, it just makes it a very awesome callback card. Like, you can tell the love that was put into the set with a lot of good callbacks, and this is one of them. Like Bitter Bloom Bearer, a good callback, but also a very, very strong card. Don't sleep on Bitter Bloom Bearer. Bitter Bloom Bearer is very, very good.
Number 1.
So, what is my number 1 card for Lorwyn Eclipsed? what is my personal favorite card? Now, many of you would think it's probably like some goblin or boggart, which, to be fair, completely understandable. I do like my goblin shenanigans. But the more I think about it, I feel like number one has to go with one of the more sillier jank win condition cards I have seen in this set. And also potentially very powerful. So, my number one card for Lorwyn Eclipsed has to be Mirror Form. A 6-mana instant spell, which makes each non-land permanent you control become a copy of target non-aura permanent. Y'all, this card is silly. This card is a very silly magic card. First of all, it's not really that hard to set the board state for this card in general. There's stuff like we can make multiple tokens, enchantments. There's a lot of ways to get multiple permanents onto the battlefield in general to help set up for Mirror Form. There's also even a lot of tempting targets to transform into standard with this card. Like let's say, for example, you have a board state and you can make it into a copy of, like, Unstoppable Slashers. There's just, I mean, I could spend like a whole hour talking about the fun tempting targets you can do with this in standard. Like, Terror of the Peaks is funny to target with this, and then make all your fiends into Terror of the Peaks. There's even just some powerful artifacts that being able to make all of them into multiple copies of that specific artifact is very good, like Simulacrum Synthesizer at your opponent's end step, and then play a free drop artifact, and then get all those Simulacrum Synthesizer triggers. It's just, oh, there's so many cool feats you can do with this card. Also, instant speed helps us a lot, so you can do it at the end of your opponent's turn. And also, it can be used for ramp, because the thing that people are going to miss about this card is that you can't actually target lands with this. Now, yes, your lands don't become whatever it is, but remember, target non-aura permanent. So you can actually target a land on this effect and be a significant source of ramp depending on how many permanents you have on the battlefield. Also, keep in mind, you can also target your opponent's stuff. So if your opponent has a really tempting target, like, say, I don't know, that Moon Shadow that everybody's going to try to brew around. So now making all your fiends into a copy of Moon Shadow without the -1/-1 counters. Oh, there's just a lot of fun shenanigans you can do with this card. You can tell from the joy that I'm having about talking about this card. There's a lot of cool stuff you can probably do with this in standard, but without a doubt, this is going to be a popular Commander card. But I am very excited for Mirror Form. There's a lot of silly shenanigans if you develop your board state right and such, and just, oh, I can't wait to brew around this card. This card looks just so fun. And that is my top 10 cards of Lorwyn Eclipsed. So as you can see, this set actually looks utterly delightful. I would still say give a chance, look at the whole set yourself. I think you're going to find a card that's going to give you absolute joy. Maybe even as joy as I have with Mirror Form, or about as much joy as people have with the Jim Henson trailer, because, no, seriously, that trailer is really good. Nevertheless, what are your personal top favorite cards of the set? You can leave it down in the comments down below. I hope you all have a lovely day. As they say, hip hip hooray!